Well, welcome to the first annual Jean Monnet Chair undergraduate conference, Imagining European Futures. I first need to thank the European Union for supporting this event and all the events related to the module through its Erasmus Plus program. The idea of this conference is to conclude the module Imagining European Futures. Since this is a research-based module, it only makes sense to conclude with some kind of dissemination event where you can share your research findings. The theme of the module and of the conference is to engage with the key challenges facing European integration. And then to develop some bold ideas for reimagining European integration to make Europe more secure, more prosperous, more inclusive, and a welcome place to live for future generations. So I wish you enjoy this conference. What I would like to do now is to share with you my own thought experiment, and it's called Imagining Functional Power Europe. If anyone is interested, I can send you a paper. What I'm going to do here is to share with you a kind of brief summary of this thought experiment. So the purpose of that paper is to do this little thought experiment. It's called counterfactual kind of thought experiment, where I try to imagine European integration. So instead of taking it as it is, kind of having this territorial form with all the kind of member states being and constituting the European Union, I wanted to rethink how European integration could take place. And I thought, okay, so what if European integration took place in a kind of more functional way and not a not a territorial way. And the idea was to see if that if that different form of European integration can actually lead to different results today in terms of Europe's geopolitical environment. And specifically, I'm interested in European kind of Russian relations and the wider kind of pan-European security order. And recent events, such as the assassination in Iraq of the Iranian official, they prompt the kind of questions about Europe's role and should Europe become a more strategic, more autonomous geopolitical actor. So I thought, let's imagine that Europe had a kind of different place. So let's forget about the European Union as it is today, and let's try to think, how would it look like if Europe took a different form? So what do we mean by functional power Europe? What do we mean by functional model of European integration? Well, the idea of functionalism in international relations comes from David Metrani. He was a Romanian-born thinker who worked in the UK, and for him, international integration was the key to international peace. Most of his works come from the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. So he liked the idea of international integration. What he didn't like was the territorial form of international integration. Instead, he thought states should integrate in the areas where it suits them. So they should converge the interest around specific areas, such as trade, such as maybe security cooperation, such as kind of other ways, labor rights, etc. Other areas where it would suit the interests of them. So when it comes to European integration, he was quite a critic. He liked the idea of European coal and steel community, and he liked the idea of Euratom, because he thought, okay, those are kind of nicely delineated areas of European integration, so this is how things should be. What he didn't like as much was when European states developed European Economic Community. He thought European Economic Community was bureaucratic, diffused, and expansionist, right? He thought it was turning into some kind of big territorial bureaucracy rather than kind of focusing on those specific areas of integration, which would be then a functional model. So if we rewrite European integration along the functional lines, how could it look like? Right? How could it look like? Well, in the functional model, Europe would not evolve as it did from the European Coal and Steel Community to European Economic Community and later the European Union. There would be no European Union, okay? There would be no European Union to speak of. Instead, there will be a number of cooperation areas with different memberships, right? They would be coordinated by some kind of agency, technical agency, perhaps have some kind of input from the member states, maybe some kind of representational elements such as the European Parliament that we have now, but it would all be on a much kind of smaller scale, and those agencies would be separated. They would oversee different areas of integration. So in addition to coal and steel, new domains of integration could include trade, transport, environmental protection, education. So all the areas that the EU deals with now, but it would not be a single international organization. It would be separate entities with different memberships and states being able to join whichever areas of integration they actually like. So in addition to those, we could also think about counterterrorism, mitigation of CBRN weapons, judicial cooperation. So also the areas that are relevant under what used to be the second and the third pillar of the European Union, right? Internal and external security. These could also be kind of areas to be integrated in this kind of functional cooperation. There would be no united Europe to speak of. There would be no European actorness, right? So there would be no European Union as such, but there will be those separate areas of integration. Now, during the Cold War, most likely it would be roughly the same states being part of those integration areas as actually they were the parts of the actual European integration, right? So mostly non-communist Western states. But the idea or the logic of functional integration indicates that after the Cold War, countries like Russia, for example, could kind of more flexibly join the arrangements that it would find suitable, right? It would be much easier for Russia, for example, to join this kind of integration in the area of trade or the environment instead of joining an organization such as the European Union with a whole body of law, of norms that it would have to adopt. And it would be easier, potentially, for Russia to do that with no common foreign and security policy, no common security and defense policy, no European neighborhood policy, no Eastern partnership, right? Those would not be kind of separate policy domains uniting the whole of Europe, right? The cooperation would be much more specific, right? Focusing on specific problems. Now, if European integration evolved along those functional lines, what would be the impact on the post-Cold War European order, right? How would that impact? That's the key question that I asked in that paper. And the purpose here was to engage with this kind of influential argument that whatever problems we have today with Ukraine, with Russia, they all originate in the kind of period immediately post-Cold War, where the West, the United States, and Western Europe, the European Union, failed to engage Russia properly at the moment when Russia was most vulnerable and actually most keen and most ready to integrate. At that time in Russia, most influence, was yielded by the very kind of pro-Western, pro-liberal politicians. So there was this kind of new elite that emerged, with Mikhail Gorbachev being part of it, Boris Yeltsin later. So there was this kind of moment of liberalization in Russia, an expectation that Russia can now become a part of the Western world. So the argument is that the West kind of failed to integrate Russia at that moment and instead opted for expanding NATO and expanding European integration without giving Russia any prospects, realistic prospects of membership. So in the paper, I kind of engage with that argument, and I outline three scenarios, three possible scenarios. What could happen after the Cold War if Europe integrated in a kind of more functional rather than territorial way? So those scenarios kind of are, they differ according to what strategies the United States and Russia would adopt. And here is the kind of key argument that I make. The policy of the United States would still be key after the Cold War. So even if Europe adopted a more kind of functional way to integrate, the United States would still play a key role. So the first scenario that I think about is what I call a peaceful order. In this scenario, both Russia and the United States adopt an accommodating strategy. Here, Europe would have been able to expand its web of functional cooperation areas to the former Soviet Union countries. Functional integration would not have caused this peaceful order, but it would have reinforced Russia's perception of inclusion in the Western political, economic, and cultural order. The second scenario is temporary peaceful order. Temporary peaceful order. In this scenario, Russia is initially accommodating towards the West, but its foreign policy strategy evolves into defensiveness as the United States and NATO continue to expand. The opportunities for functional integration involving Russia become increasingly constrained as Russian nationalist sentiments grow. The final kind of scenario that I look at is conflictual order. In this scenario, both the United States and Russia emerge from the Cold War as highly suspicious towards each other and are not keen on undertaking substantial reconciliation efforts. Functional cooperation in that case would have remained geographically constrained to the Cold War boundaries, and efforts to involve newly independent states would be interpreted by Russia as acts of hostility. So my conclusion is that by itself, the kind of non-territorial functional form of European integration would have a very limited effect on European security situation after the Cold War. It would not shape, Europe would not shape the geopolitical environment on the European continent. Instead, functional power Europe would have acted as an accelerator and multiplier of cooperation between the United States and Russia, but only if they adopted accommodating strategies. If any of them adopted kind of strategies short of accommodation, right, that would have a profound impact on what Europe would be capable of. In this context, the restricted impact of functional power Europe on European security order points to the limits of functionalism as a theory of international integration, but more importantly, as a strategy towards international peace and security. But it also points to the limits of Western Europe in shaping its broader geopolitical environment. Of course, if we now return to the present world, the world in which we live today, the key question is, can Europe become more effective in shaping its broader geopolitical environment? On the one hand, the new European Commission seems to be committed to that very objective. And on the other hand, events like the aforementioned assassination in Iraq of the Iranian official seem to suggest that achieving that objective should indeed be top priority for Europe. So thank you very much.